Hey y'all, welcome back to Made It Out to the Polls, our voter education series in collaboration with LPAC. Before we get started, I want to announce our brand new merch piece. It's our Lesbians for Kamala t-shirt that is out now, and all proceeds will be going to LPAC. This week, I sit down with Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. Senator Baldwin has been out there fighting for our rights for a while now, and she was the one who championed the Respect for Marriage Act, which called for all 50 states to recognize same-sex marriages. Before we get started, I think it's important to kind of give a background on the history of gay marriage in the U.S. So here is Alix and Zoya peeling fruit to explain.
Efforts to legalize same-sex marriage began to pop up across the country in the 90s. Cases were introduced in states such as Hawaii, Massachusetts, California, and same-sex marriages started to be recognized in those places. However, if a couple got married in Hawaii but moved to Kentucky, for example, their marriage would not be recognized there.
But in 2014, here baby, a man named Jim Obergefell was living in the high. A man named Jim Obergefell was living in the...
What's wrong with you?
I don't know. I almost fucking...
Was living in Ohio with his boyfriend John. When his boyfriend John got diagnosed with ALS, just peel fruit, and knew they didn't have much time left together, they decided to travel to Maryland and get married.
Don't do
when
it.
When they got back home to Ohio, they were told that health decisions and inheritance laws did not apply due to Ohio's same-sex marriage ban. So Jim Obergefell sued the state. The case made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and resulted in a landmark ruling that required same-sex marriages be performed and recognized in all 50 states. How about them apples? This is the next.
Well, now we have to get married. So thanks a lot.
Can we start with just where are you from and what kind of gay representation you had growing up?
Oh, wow. What a great question. So I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and I had a sort of interesting backstory. So my mother was only 19 when I was born. She was going through a divorce, and she struggled throughout her life with both mental illness and chronic physical illness. And so she moved home with her parents, my grandparents, and they raised me. And I was so fortunate to have their love and their stability. And my mother was always in my life, but as I said, she had really big struggles. And I came out in college, and I wanted to give some context to my experience. So who were the great gay figures of history in all the different fields and, the arts and politics and whatever. And there were very few that had gotten uplifted, right? It wasn't that there were very few, but their stories weren't really told. And I remember when I was coming out, seeing the documentary Before Stonewall and learning about all these amazing people who were activists, and then learning about Stonewall and the rioters who were standing up against nightly acts of police oppression.
If you've been in New York, you might be familiar with the bar Stonewall. But are you aware of its history? Here to explain the Stonewall riots is content creator Hina playing Pac-Man.
Oh, the Stonewall riots? Yeah, the Stonewall riots were a series of protests that occurred in New York City in June of 1969. These riots were a turning point in LGBTQ plus rights movement, marking the beginning of a period of increased visibility and activism. In '69, it was actually illegal to be gay, and the FBI even kept a list of LGBTQ plus people, which they used to find members of our community and arrest them. Gay people created safe havens where they could be themselves. The Stonewall Inn in New York City was one of them. One night, the police raided the bar, arresting patrons and staff for homosexual behavior. It's what we do. This night, the crowd fought back and evolved into a full-blown riot with hundreds of working-class queer people throwing rocks, bottles, and bricks at authorities. The incident sparked a series of protests over the next few days as LGBTQ plus individuals and their allies, led in large by trans women of color, fought back against police harassment and discrimination. The Stonewall riots are remembered as a symbol of LGBTQ plus resistance and a catalyst for the gay rights movement. These riots help to raise awareness of these issues faced by LGBTQ plus people and are the reason that we continue to celebrate Pride today. Anyway.
and then learned about Harvey Milk and Elaine Noble, who was elected in Massachusetts, and Alan Speer, who was elected in Minnesota. So I can't cite very many gay leaders in my early life. But when I came out, it was really important to me to put some context around what I was going through and to find that community and find the leaders of that community.
Yeah. We often forget, because we have so many protections now, that we're so close to a generation that didn't have the same protections and we're living a completely different reality.
Yeah.
Do you mind giving us a little bit of a snapshot of what gay rights looked like back when you first came out?
Yeah. So when I think about what we were working towards, first of all, just anti-discrimination rules, laws, policies, so that people couldn't be fired for being gay, so that you couldn't be denied housing. People would be turned away or not served at public accommodations like restaurants, et cetera. Those are the early battles that I remember. And then the other that came hand in hand with it was relationship recognition. And this was before many people were talking about the idea of same-sex marriage, gay marriage, marriage equality. People were just saying, I've been with my partner and, if I were to die, I would want them to get my pension. Or we're raising children together. We don't have a legal relationship to one another. And so one of us doesn't have a legal relationship to our children. And what if there was a custody battle after something happened to one of them? So people just looking for very basic recognition of the relationships that they were in, so that they could share some of the rights and responsibilities that married couples had by virtue of a marriage certificate, right?
Yeah.
So those were a lot of the early battles.
So we're here to discuss the Respect for Marriage Act, which you championed. Can you just tell us a little bit about what does it do, why is it important, and what sparked the need for this bill?
So the Respect for Marriage Act became incredibly important to advance after the case that overturned Roe versus Wade was handed down. So that was a case called the Dobbs decision. And so let me connect the dots between why an abortion case would implicate a challenge to either same-sex or interracial marriage. The court in the Dobbs decision said that back when Roe was decided, which was in 1973, that court got it wrong, that they based the decision on a constitutional right to privacy. In other words, government had no business sticking its nose into these deeply private concerns. I went to law school, so I can tell you, I read the Dobbs decision. I'm like, well, there were a whole bunch of cases that were based on a constitutional right to privacy. The contraception case called Griswold was just cited in, I think it was 1965, said women have a fundamental right to privacy and government has no business saying who can or cannot have contraception. And it just for people who can't believe this was ever the case, in some states you had to prove you were married. In some states you had to have your husband's permission. Like you can't sneak around his back, right? And get contraception.
Oh my gosh.
So they said there's a fundamental right to privacy. In interracial marriage, there's a case called Loving where they struck down a Virginia statute that made it a crime to be in an interracial marriage. A crime. And the Supreme Court struck down that statute and said, there's a fundamental right to privacy, private things like choosing to marry the person you love, that the government just has no interest in business snooping around in. There's a case called the Lawrence decision, which dealt with sodomy statutes. There was a time police would barge in and arrest based on intimate behavior between consenting adults. The Lawrence decision said, this is privacy. People have a right to privacy and government should not be getting into their business. And same-sex marriage, the Obergefell case, same thing, based on a fundamental and constitutional right to privacy. So the way that the court got to the Dobbs decision was said, the word privacy isn't in the U.S. Constitution. So if you read it literally, you can't just imply a right to privacy. It doesn't say there's a right to privacy, so we're not going to accept that there is. So that was a long-winded way of saying, what are they coming after next? And if it weren't enough that that was implied by the majority decision, Justice Clarence Thomas actually listed the cases out. He listed the contraception case. He listed the Lawrence decision. He listed the Obergefell, the same-sex marriage decision. By the way, he conveniently left out of that list the interracial marriage case. But he listed the others and said we should relitigate these cases in front of this Supreme Court with 3 Trump justices, right?
Wow. So what are Supreme Court justices? And why does it matter that Trump got to appoint 3? Here's pop star Zolita line dancing to explain.
The Supreme Court is made up of 9 justices who serve lifelong appointments. The primary role of the justices is to hear and decide cases that involve federal law or the Constitution. They may also review decisions made by the lower courts. The Supreme Court's decisions have a profound impact on American law and society. They can uphold or overturn laws, establish new legal precedents, and shape the interpretation of the Constitution. One of the most consequential powers a president has is that of Supreme Court justice appointments. Historically, presidents would make these appointments with balance in mind. If they were replacing a more progressive-leaning judge, the replacement would be more progressive-leaning, moderate with moderate, conservative with conservative. Former President Trump had the opportunity to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices during his term, shifting the court to a conservative majority. Now watch me line dance.
So if Obergefell were to be overturned, there would be only recognition of same-sex marriages in those states where they have legalized them at the state level. So a state like Wisconsin, where we have a constitutional amendment that bans same-sex marriage, that would not be available in the state of Wisconsin. So getting back to the Respect for Marriage Act, we introduced it weeks after the Dobbs decision came out to respond to this. It's like, and it basically says, it puts in federal law that if you have a legally recognized marriage, so if you were married, say, before Obergefell was struck down, if it would ever be in the future, which we hope it never will be, that marriage would be recognized in every single state and by the federal government. What happens prospectively? So say a Wisconsinite wanted to get married. Well, we have a ban in Wisconsin on the books in the state. But you could go to Minnesota, or you could go to Canada, where they've had it for a long, long time. You could go to a state where marriage is recognized. You can be married, and then all 50 states, including Wisconsin, would have to respect that, recognize it, because we passed the Respect for Marriage Act. So it works just a little bit differently prospectively than it does retroactively. But if you have a legally valid marriage, it must be recognized by the federal government and in all 50 states, regardless of what the state law is.
Got it.
We introduced the bill, and I can tell you, all these people came up to us like, in these divided times and in the wake of the Dobbs decision, you don't really think you could pass this, do you?
Wow.
Now, remember in the Senate, in the House, it's a simple majority vote. Mm-hmm. But in the Senate, there's this thing called the filibuster, which to overcome a filibuster, you need 60 votes, more than a simple majority. Mm-hmm. We had 50 Democrats, but we needed at least 10 Republicans.
Wow.
And it shouldn't be that there should be partisanship about who should marry and not, but there sadly is.
What does partisan even mean? Here to explain is model Iris Walker trimming her bushes.
There are 2 main political parties, the Democratic and the Republican Party. Do you know what partisanship is? It's when you have a strong loyalty to a particular party. So when politicians only work with one member of their own party, they're being partisan. Now when they compromise and work with both parties, they're being bi. No, I mean bipartisan.
I was just so determined to find Republicans who wanted to join us in passing this. And anyways, the reporters would come up to me and go like, you don't think you can do this? I said, well, just wait, just watch. And I knew I had Republican colleagues who knew us, who had family members that would be impacted by this, who had staff members who would be impacted by this, who went to church with people who would be impacted by this. And I thought, there must be at least 10 who could get to yes. And in the end, I was able to help persuade 12 Republicans to join all 50 Democrats. And we passed the Respect for Marriage Act, even in these deeply divided times.
Before a bill passes, you have to rally support kind of from both sides and traditionally make some concessions.
Right.
What are the concessions that you feel like you made on this bill?
I knew that I had some Republican colleagues who wanted to get to yes. And so part of my job was to help them find a path to get to yes. They're like, what are your concerns? What are your reservations about voting yes on this bill? One set of reservations were that there was the opposition was saying this would interfere with people's religious liberties. They falsely said that this would force religious institutions to celebrate and solemnize gay marriages, which is not the case. But they were, the opposition was saying that. And so it's like, okay, so if we can clarify that it doesn't do that, would this give you greater comfort? Yeah, if I can point to a line in the bill that says it doesn't do that, that would be of comfort to us. And so basically we added language to clarify that the bill had no impact on either expanding or contracting religious liberties in America. It had no impact on it at all. And to be able to say that, and for them to be able to point to the opposition that was, just putting forward these factually incorrect assertions, would help them get to yes. So there were a couple of things along those lines where they just wanted the clarity, and they wanted us to put it in the legislation rather than resting on the fact that many lawyers had said, look, it's not going to expand religious liberties, it's not going to diminish religious liberties. Look, can you just say that? Yes, we can.
Fine.
Fine, we'll say it. We'll put it in the bill. And so that's the type of, it's an example of what we did in order to be able to gain people's support.
Does that mean that we can stop worrying, or is there still more work to be done?
Oh my gosh, there's so much more work to be done. So we have made some advances in non-discrimination policies. We started our conversation about the fact that you want to make sure that employers can't fire people because they're part of the LGBTQ community. And we've seen some amazing advances in those policies and rules and laws in states across the country and localities across the country. We actually had a really major court victory relating to employment discrimination a few years back that say you can't fire somebody or fail to advance them because they are gay, lesbian, or transgender. But we don't have those protections nationwide in housing, in education, in public accommodations, and in various other aspects. And we have a measure that has been proposed in Congress called the Equality Act, which would comprehensively deal with all of those areas: employment, housing, education, public accommodations, and a few like jury duty and a few other miscellaneous things. And, basically using the same structure as we've used for other civil rights laws that we've passed. And we've yet to pass that into law. And so really where you live may well dictate whether you have those protections or not. Now, in Wisconsin, for example, we were one of the first states to pass an anti-discrimination law that protects gay and lesbian people, but we do not have any protections in employment and housing and public accommodations, education for transgender individuals. So it's a patchwork quilt, and the Equality Act would make it not a patchwork quilt. We would have these protections no matter where you were in the United States of America. It's been introduced every session, but it has yet to cross the finish line and become enacted into law. And then there's a lot of other smaller areas. We need to have more protections for older Americans in the Older Americans Act. We need to be counted. And when I say that, what I would tell you, I don't know, this is rather long aside, but when I was in the House of Representatives, I was sitting on a panel that oversees healthcare issues. And we were beginning to understand that there were huge disparities between, healthcare for women and healthcare for men, healthcare for communities of color. And it had to do with access, but outcomes and cultural sensitivity, et cetera. And often when we would have hearings to bring this out and try to inform the policy, I'd have some people from whichever administration it was sitting in front, health officials, et cetera. And everyone would ask these questions. And I'd say, tell me about health disparities that exist for people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And I'd get this blank stare back, or somebody looking at the staff assistant behind them. They're like, we'll have to get back to you. And it's like, okay, so why do we not have this information? Mm-hmm. Well, we do a lot of healthcare surveys where we tease out these inequities, these disparities, but they never ask. They ask, are you, what race are you? What gender? They don't necessarily ask, are you part of the LGBTQ community? And so if we're not counted, if there's not data, right, our challenges don't exist. And one of the things you find out when you ask, say, racial questions is to say, racism can cause health outcomes. If you're discriminated against throughout your life, that's sort of like a traumatic thing. Mm-hmm. And it has health consequences. Some communities have even declared racism a public health crisis. The same thing happens for people in the LGBTQ community. And so we've got to have knowledge. We've got to have data. So just counting us is important. When we talk about the higher rates of depression or suicide in the LGBTQ community, we only know that because we do surveys and ask the questions. Right. And to be able to say, how does a LGBTQ teen compare to the overall teenage population in terms of reported depression or reported sense of isolation or reported thoughts about suicide. But only when you know that can you do something about it. Right. So that's pretty important.
So a lot of the news coverage is about the presidential election. But can you tell us, why is the Senate race so important, and especially in battleground states like Wisconsin? And how can people help you, even if they're not in your state?
Wow. So, representation matters. I've always believed that if our legislative bodies looked like the populations they represented, we would be better governed, right? Mm-hmm. And so, women are underrepresented in the United States Senate, although I've seen improvement during the time I've been here. Certainly having a seat at the table matters. I like to say that if you're not in the room, the conversation in the room is about you. If you're in the room, the conversation is with you. Mm. And we all bring our life experiences to our jobs. It's not like a coat check. I've been check it out there and then I go in. No, it informs our votes, our decisions, the policies we champion, the priorities we set. And so having out LGBTQ representation in Congress, in the Senate, in the House, in legislatures across the country matters. So I think we make better policy when we're in the room. Yeah. And that makes my Senate race hugely important. And, I was the first in American history, first out LGBTQ senator in American history. And then I was joined by an out bisexual senator in Kirsten Sinema. And then when, sadly, Dianne Feinstein, such a great champion of our issues, passed away, the governor of California appointed an out lesbian to succeed her on a temporary basis until they elect a new senator, LaFonza Butler. So right now there's 3 out people in the U.S. Senate, but both Kyrsten Sinema and LaFonza Butler are leaving at the end of the session. I want more seats at the table. I'm not being greedy. I want us to have a voice at all levels of government.
And can you tell me why this election coming up, the presidential election, could affect the Respect for Marriage Act?
So I think we can, I hope we can rest assured that having passed the Respect for Marriage Act, we have a huge insurance policy moving forward. You would need 60 votes to repeal it. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that happening in the Senate anytime soon. It makes the Senate races, of course, very important. But I do think one thing we should be thoughtful about when we look at the presidential race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is Donald Trump appointed 3 justices who he knew would vote to overturn Roe versus Wade, and he knows would also vote to overturn Obergefell. Mm-hmm. Let us not give him the chance to appoint 1 or 2 more, or we will have a hostile and activist Supreme Court for generations to come. We always think about, too often we think only about who's going to be president, but not about the lifelong appointments a president makes. Mm-hmm. And so think about that. If you care about the rule of law, if you care about democracy, if you care about, some of these landmark cases that have advanced our rights and freedoms, that they are clearly coming after. What's next? Contraception? What's next? IVF? What's next? Same-sex marriage? What's next? So I'm super excited about supporting Kamala Harris. I'm so super excited because I know she will fight for our rights and freedoms. And I know she will fight to preserve our democracy. And I also know the track record of the other guy. I was here on January 6th during the insurrection. I know that he orchestrated to put forward false electors who would have overcome and overturned the will of the American people. He would do that again. We can't let him.
So, as you know, we've partnered with LPAC to introduce our listeners to trailblazers like you. And they were formed in 2012 to support your Senate race in large part. And they've been with you ever since.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us why organizations like LPAC are so important and what donating to them can do?
They're incredibly important for visibility and raising our voice. I mean, I think of all of the political action committees that exist out there that have, sometimes they're around different economic sectors or different professions or different issues. There's environmental political action committees, which are so important in raising the issues there. There's a whole range, but I don't think we've ever had, until they were founded in 2012, a political action committee that was raising the visibility of lesbians and looking for specifically candidates who were going to support the issues that we care so deeply about. They're not going to support candidates who are working against our agenda, which is equality, right?
Right.
Now, we certainly have some allied PACs like Human Rights Campaign and others, but this was unique, and I think so important because we do have some unique issues and high time.
Right. We do one fun little game.
Okay.
It's very quick.
It's not one question. Embarrass me of how little pop culture I know.
Not at all. So you haul or you ghost. She's perfect in every way, but she's running for Senate in Wisconsin, and her home and all her business is done in Orange County.
You ghost.
You ghost. This series is a collaboration between Made It Out Media and LPAC. This episode was produced by Matilde Jordan, Jacqueline Taboni, and Michelle Atwood, with special help from Sarah Gross. Thank you to all of our cameo guests, Alix Traeger, Zoya Biglary, Hina, Zolita, and Iris Walker. Tune in next Thursday, October 3rd, for my conversation with Lauren Ashley Simmons on religion's role in policy and the anti-LGBTQ agenda.
Tammy for Senate. She is fighting for our rights. Gay marriage is brat.